I think it's going. Okay, so I'm going to start the meeting. We are recording to the cloud and are live on YouTube. It is 4:06 on Tuesday, February 15th. And we have a quorum. There are 12 members present with Francisco's here, our project manager. And I'm going to go right to the agenda. And I will take, we did not accept the minutes from November because we didn't have a quorum in December. So that's what the no quorum means. So I'll take a motion from someone who was present at the November meeting to accept the November meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Paul, second by Fred. Freddie, you were absent. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm reading the wrong one. I'm wrong. Hold on. I switched my sheets here. Paul with, do you have Freddie down? Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm wrong. I think we're good. Oh, no, you were absent in November, Fred. So I just need a second from somebody else.
I'll
Paul.
second.
Who's that? Bob, thank you. Okay, Bob. Sorry, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm just, okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None, motion carried. Okay, and so in December, we did not have a quorum, so we're just gonna post these as meeting notes from that meeting, instead of like formally adopting them as meeting minutes. We've done that in the past. Okay, so I am going to share my screen and Francisco will jump right into, hold on one second. He will jump into the presentation. Okay, you're all set, Francisco. Yep.
Do you need a motion to approve the December minutes meeting or minutes of the meeting?
Well, we're just going to post them. I don't know that they formally need to be approved because we didn't have a quorum. So we just kind of met without a formal, we didn't have a quorum to have an actual meeting,
Okay.
but we just did business. So I think we're good. We've done that.
You just said that, but I wanted to make sure. I
Are you
understand.
testing me? Because I did land at 4:30 in the morning. So I'm just making sure you're testing me. All right, go ahead, Francisco.
Okay, thanks everyone. It's good to see you all again. Welcome to our February meeting. This is our 15th meeting. So there's been a lot of work done to date. And let me quickly review what it is we're looking to accomplish this afternoon. We will review, or I will review, the focus group meeting findings with you. As a reminder, we conducted 6 focus group meetings with key stakeholders, and so that you're all appraised of the subject matter discussed in those meetings. I will briefly review some of the comments and ideas that came out of those meetings. And then we will, similarly, we'll talk about the Affordable Housing Plan workshop that was in a very similar format. We had a very similar type of discussion with that group. And then most importantly here is we're going to start shifting gears into producing this plan. And that begins with having a discussion about the key themes that have emerged from all of this outreach that we've done, from all of our meetings, and from all of the discovery that we've done along the course of the way. And then finally, we'll talk about next steps with respect to our project schedule. Okay, a review of community engagement to date. We've conducted pop-up events at which we've engaged over 200 people. The online survey, of course, had over 1,200 participants. We did both the in-person and the virtual workshops with almost 100 attendees in both of those. And our focus group meetings brought together over 50 participants over the course of the 6 meetings. So we have a lot of input from the public and from key stakeholders that we've documented and that are helping to inform this process. The focus group meetings, as I mentioned, there were 6 of them. Housing and neighborhoods, economic development, city services and facilities, transportation and infrastructure, cultural and historic resource, and open space and environmental. And those were all conducted in the second half of January, so not that long ago. And I'll work through those one by one. I'm not going to read all these. I'll just point to a couple things that jumped out to us, and you can see we have some items highlighted here. In our housing and neighborhoods group, some of the issues that came up over and over again were schools being over capacity is a big concern. The need for affordable senior housing, discussion about Danbury being kind of a victim of its own success, and that it's had a lot of growth, and that's brought with it some challenges and concerns about overcrowding, illegal and unpermitted subdivisions of housing and partitioning of housing. And I expect that a lot of this can be very familiar to you because we've been talking about these issues for a while now. Some of the ideas that came out of this, and once again, this is what we heard from participants. These aren't necessarily going to be recommendations of the plan unless there's a lot of support for some of these ideas. And by example, the idea to have micro units as something to allow within the realm of housing options. And my comment to that would be that the state in Public Act 2129 is now telling towns and cities that you can't regulate units based upon size. So you can't establish a minimum unit size for a dwelling unit. That will now be governed by what building code allows. And so the concept of micro units is something that's going to be implicitly allowed by the state, and that the city really won't be able to restrict. Of course, you can continue to restrict where multifamily housing is developed, but the size of the unit will be something that a city, any city, and Danbury, in this case, won't be able to restrict. There was a lot of discussion around density being one of the best solutions for providing affordable housing in Danbury. And the idea that the downtown area and the core of the city was the best place to provide more housing and more affordable housing. And the only way you can do that is by increasing density. There was discussion about the fact that affordable housing needs incentives like tax breaks and fee reductions. There are ideas to relax the zoning regulations to allow for more units and greater density, particularly in the downtown. To expand the central business district zone north, which would allow for more mixed-use development and a higher density of development between the downtown as it is and the central business district zone as it is and I-84. And a lot of discussion around investing in the downtown and how downtown development would be something very positive for Danbury. Of course, balanced against the fact that downtown has a bunch of historic structures that people are interested in maintaining. Continuing on, housing and neighborhoods. There was, I already talked about the historic structures. So there's, concern about having discussions about new development downtown and ensuring that that doesn't threaten the historic fabric that is there. Once again, ensuring that the zoning regulations allow sufficient flexibility in addressing issues such as parking requirements. The need for the POCD to provide support for redevelopment of targeted areas. And so that discussion was around identifying specific areas, whether it be downtown or areas on the west side of the city, that the city should focus on for redevelopment, new development, infill development. And there we had a comment about more zoning tools to enable that sort of thing, such as a floating overlay zone. And the way that would work would be you would write a zoning district with certain allowances or requirements, and provided that a piece of property met the conditions or requirements of that district, that property could be could be built under the conditions of that overlay zone or district. And so it's a tool that just allows more flexibility and than the current zoning allows, and it's currently not a zoning tool that is used. So those were some of the ideas that came out of that discussion.
Francisco,
Yes,
Sorry to interrupt right there, but
yeah, go ahead.
the floating overlays zone, uh, give me an example. I mean, let's say we have a single family zone. This
Yeah.
floating zone could be overlaid and be multifamily, for example. Is that
Well, you
correct?
can, yeah, let's talk through that. You can
So
set the
why would
condition.
we even bother to zone?
Yeah, you can set the conditions. So, uh, an example of a floating overlay zone is a special development district wherein you write all the rules of a zoning district, but you don't fix it to a particular geographic area. You make its use contingent upon certain conditions being met. So, as an example, it may be that you say this zone may be permitted in any district that's currently zoned for commercial, high density residential, that has a parcel size that's a certain size, that has access to a certain type of roadway. And provided all those conditions are met, you can build under these regulations, which are typically more permissive. They allow more density, more in height. They might have other requirements. They may require a much higher level of design or public amenity to be provided. And
Francisco, excuse me, our PND, Joel, is a floating zone. The Planned Neighborhood Development District in our regs is written as a floating zone.
Yeah, but this is Arnie, but that was specific for that big chunk of land on the west side. That's I think what Francisco's talking about is what we saw, and I think somebody came in with this at one point. I have a vague memory. We dismissed it. This is bringing into a residential neighborhood a floating overlay zone, which would increase density. And I recall at the time, I don't remember when this came in, we had some problems with it. And we didn't.
Yeah, no, that as well. I'm just saying, you're right in that respect, and that was on Clapboard Ridge Road. But in our zoning regs, the PND is written as a floating zone, and that actually could apply somewhere else. If you had 100 acres and you met all those other requirements, you could come in. So it may have been written to address something over there, but if somebody had 100 acres over on Commerce Park and wanted to do it, you could consider that as well.
And this is Perry. I would imagine you could exclude it from certain zones too.
You can.
I would think, right? Yeah.
you can,
Cool.
You absolutely can. So I don't want to get too bogged down because this is just an idea that was put out there. And really at the core of the idea is that we need zoning to be a little more flexible. We need more tools to enable the type of development that we would like to see in Danbury. And that's at the core of this comment. And the idea for a floating zone, and Sharon rightly points out the city does have one.
I would have to say I would be very cautious and about even considering that as a point in the POCD that we want to put in there, that we want floating zones, or floating zones are the way to go. I mean, it's just it really opens a can of worms.
Yeah, so Joel, with respect to that, I don't expect that we're going to point to floating zones as a tool that's going to solve problems. Rather, it may be that we identify an opportunity for a very specific type of floating zone that might help unlock things. And we provide a specific recommendation for the city or for the planning zoning commission to consider a review of the feasibility of doing that sort of thing. So the POCD is where we would lay the groundwork for that type of thing. But we don't have to commit the city to going down that road at the same time.
Yeah, we're going to be very cautious how that's worded,
Right.
if it's in the POCD at all.
Right. You're
Okay.
right. We don't want to say establish a floating zone to do this, because then it's a directive. However, if we think it's a solution that has, or an idea that has some potential, we might want to direct the city towards considering or reviewing, or you understand what I mean?
I understand what you mean, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would be comfortable that being in POCD. Anyway, let's forge ahead. I just wanted to
Okay,
raise
sure.
that flag.
All right. All right. All right. So that was housing and neighborhoods. Any other questions before we move on to economic development? You good? Okay. Economic development, what we heard more than once is that traffic, and specifically east-west traffic on I-84 or along city streets parallel to I-84 trying to get across town is a real challenge. And that traffic congestion is really a barrier to economic development. In addition to that, it has impacts on quality of life, and that can in turn make it challenging to attract residents, new workers, employees, whatever it may be. We also heard that the downtown has very little to offer downtown workers. So it's not really attractive from a selling perspective of selling businesses or people on working downtown, because there's not a lot of places to go to lunch, not a lot of shopping to do, not much for destinations. And we heard from employers that really have still chosen to locate downtown, to locate staff downtown, and who have staff that, you know, willingly work downtown, but I guess this is one of their grievances. Along those lines, the Still River has been identified as an underutilized resource. Continuing on, you know, this is related to downtown, the fact that it's perceived that Main Street is really just a traffic conduit and it's not enough of a place, that there's a focus on moving cars and not on placemaking. And a lot of talk really nostalgic for the way downtown was 30 years ago, and a lot of perception that it was a more active, vibrant place 30 years ago, and certainly an interest in recapturing a lot of that vibrancy, or doing what's needed to recapture that. And I think what a lot of people feel is what it comes down to is downtown needs more people, and likely needs more residents in the downtown to populate the streets. With respect to ideas, people feel that the city, to the extent that the city can encourage this or support it, is to focus, there needs to be a focus on workforce development. Of course, the question is, how can the city play a role in that? And maybe that comes in the form of partnership, and linking the technical schools with employers, but there needs to be a focus on workforce development, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is to help attract businesses to Danbury and to have the workforce that has the expertise necessary to staff those businesses, and really just to improve the ability of Danbury's residents to find work and afford life in Danbury. Encourage young entrepreneurs to establish businesses in Danbury. Need to do a better job leveraging the presence of Western Connecticut and other universities. And there was discussion about the need for property owners to be part of this solution for downtown, that the city can only do so much. The private sector really has to meet them halfway, and the importance for really buy-in for a common vision that everyone can buy into and move in the same direction on. All right, and continuing on, a little bit of discussion about the mall and the fact that it needs to transform and reinvent itself, and the mall admittedly is leading on this. They're taking a lead and trying to find new tenants and think outside the retail box as it is. The need for the POCD to lay the groundwork for changes to the city zoning, such as mixed-use commercial zones, hybrid industrial zones, and once again, here we are at floating zones. The need to analyze where public sewer and water is in target growth areas that are currently served or within reach of that infrastructure. So, I think the city already does this. You're already somewhat limited in development by where you can provide sewer and water. But that came in once again as I think people are seeing that infrastructure as an opportunity, and they have the feeling that there is sewer and water infrastructure in areas of the city that is not necessarily being leveraged for new development, and we should be looking at where that potential is. Federal Road was mentioned as an example. The need for more sidewalks throughout the city, and this came up in economic development discussion. And I think one example of that was students at Western Connecticut that are walking down the road, not a sidewalk in hand, trying to get to local businesses. And if we could better connect pedestrians in the city, that would be a good thing for our local businesses and for economic development. Okay. Any questions or comments on what we heard from the economic development meeting? I expect this all sounds pretty familiar to you. All right, city services and facilities. The issues we talked about, of course, are schools and enrollment, and we talked about where that enrollment is coming from, and I think by the end of our meeting, people pretty well understood it's being driven by existing neighborhoods, which sets up a whole conversation about, is there something the city should be doing to ensure that to manage this growth, basically is what it comes down to address the overcrowding issue so that enrollment is a little more stable and predictable, and the city can do a better job planning for it. And we talked a lot about the challenges in providing school facilities that meet current needs. The school district has to do a lot of shuffling, particularly during the COVID era, trying to keep density down in classrooms, and how that's really, it's come at a tremendous cost to the district, and it's been logistically very challenging. So we talked quite a bit about that. Some of that will be hopefully, if and when we get past some of these COVID restrictions, it'll be a little less of an issue. But regardless, the city has an enrollment issue that needs to be addressed by essentially by more classrooms. We also talked about transportation being a challenge in Danbury. Despite the transit the city does have, there are a lot of seniors living in the outskirts of Danbury that don't have access to transportation. And that we talked about that issue through a couple different perspectives. One was, all right, ensuring that they have access to transportation. And the other way we approached this topic was the discussion about providing more housing that is available to, appropriate for seniors, that is in proximity of transit, so downtown, near downtown. Okay, when we shifted gears talking ideas, we talked about the importance of balancing all the needs that are being discussed and the ideas around what types of facility improvements are needed and new facilities are needed, against balancing that against the tax implications. And that's always a challenge. And that we talked a little bit about that. Schools already addressed. With respect to meeting facility needs, we talked about looking into the reuse of existing structures, whether it be for community-based facilities needs or schools. And the city has some buildings that it already owns, and the idea or the desire was to ensure that whatever the city already owns, we're looking at for reusing to meet city or school needs. And then we talked about some things that are a little more fun, the need for, or the desire for more recreation space, particularly in the winter time, by example, something that would accommodate indoor soccer and other sports during winter months. And finally, the need to maintain city services. And so while we talk about all the facility upgrades and new facilities that are needed, I think everyone understands that that can't come at the cost of the ability of the city being able to, and their ability to maintain its existing facilities and infrastructure, and to do so going forward in the future. So maintenance and continuing to maintain is a priority, as is, you know, providing new facilities, and then that's something that's really important. All right, and that maintenance is everything from sidewalks and infrastructure, roads to buildings and other facilities. Okay, any comments or questions on city service and facilities? Okay. Transportation and infrastructure, there's some overlap with the city service and facilities discussion. Once again, there's desire to provide more sidewalks, expand sidewalks, and I think we all know what the challenges are with respect to maintenance and the cost of doing so, and more complete streets options, which, you know, would mean more bike facilities, traffic calming elements, improved or safer intersections. We also, of course, talked about, once again, I-84, the need to address congestion. We had Sherrod from CDM Smith representing DOT to talk about the I-84 project. I think we all understand that's many years away before those improvements would be built. But you know, within our discussion, I think everyone's pretty favorable about the ideas coming out of that study and the improvements that would likely occur. Realizing, of course, that during construction there would be some impacts as well. But what I heard from our participants was that, you know, the I-84 project's a good thing, and basically the POCD should advocate for it and support improvements along that corridor. And some other issues we also talked, you know, congestion came up quite a bit. We talked about how I-84 is a really important freight corridor, and so it needs to be able to accommodate freight traffic in addition to local traffic. We talked about the fact that a lot of local traffic uses 84 when it should be using local streets, and that's because there's congestion on local streets. And we also discussed how traffic isn't changing. By example, there's a lot more delivery trucks on the road now, and to no surprise, between Amazon and UPS delivering Amazon products with an Amazon distribution center right in the city, there's a lot more of that type of traffic on the road. And so there's the need to continue to work towards ensuring that the traffic is moving better throughout the city. And that's really important, of course, we had representatives from the hospitals in our discussion, and that's really important for them to get their staff to hospitals for emergency response as well. And it's an issue that affects everyone. And of course, within the POCD, we need to address that. All right, so some of the ideas, one of them is to have traffic safety be front and center. There was, of course, a regional traffic safety study done, and so we'll look to any of the recommendations that came out of the regional safety plan and try to provide support for that in the POCD. There's also an interest in focusing on off-road transportation connections, such as trails, just to provide some alternative forms of transportation. Hart was on our call as well, representatives from Hart, and we talked about their service. There's, you know, a desire, everyone has desire for better transit service with shorter headways and longer operating hours and that sort of thing. You know, they talked about the challenges from that, which are pretty much funding constraints and fiscal constraints, but they are, to the extent that they can finance it, and interested in shortening headways, basically increasing frequency of service and expanding service. So we talked about the important role of the transit service in the region. 84, I've covered the Maybrook line we did discuss, and I think there's a lot of excitement around this concept. And I expect that within the plan, we will look to that and look at the potential for that and figure out what kind of opportunities and advocate for whatever opportunities there may be for Danbury along the Maybrook line as it goes from downtown towards New York. And of course, you know, this is something long discussed, is relocating the Pulse Point next to the train station, and Hart is very receptive to that idea as well. All right, any questions on the transportation and infrastructure discussion? All right, I'll keep moving forward. Two more items: cultural and historic resources. We talked about the many historic properties and buildings that the city owns, and you know, many of them are mothballed or slowly going through the process of being restored or preserved or protected, and really the need to establish some clear priorities with respect to you know, what needs to happen first, you know, what these properties should be used for. Just do some more work around managing these properties. So we talked about that. We talked about the big limitation here is funding, right? Most of the improvements to the historic properties are coming through grant programs, and that's outside funding, and it's a limited funding source. And the city's been pretty successful in getting grants, but those only go so far. So that was a very important point of discussion for us. And we also talked around all about the cost associated with holding and maintaining, improving these properties for a long period of time. And then when we pivoted towards talking about ideas, it was, you know, of course, to prioritize investment in these historic resources. And the idea for coordinated and managed inventory and periodic reevaluations of all city-owned historic buildings. And so that's the historic part. And then more of the cultural part, is we talked a lot about the arts in Danbury, how there's actually a very strong art scene, but it just doesn't seem like it's been fully expressed in the downtown. There really isn't a gallery, and public arts are very limited, and how there's really a desire for Danbury to do a better job of celebrating the arts and promoting the arts, and how the city's diversity, ethnic diversity, is a very important part of its art scene, and there just is more that can be done to celebrate and promote the arts. And I think I see opportunities for the POCD to point to things that other communities of comparable size have been doing to promote the arts, to be a partner in the arts scene. And so I expect we could take a look at and here I've talked about already our comments about the arts. And then in general, just the need for the city to do a better, and the community as a whole, this doesn't fall just upon the city as an organization, to do a better job of telling Danbury's story, of promoting Danbury, of all the things that Danbury has to offer, all the things that are happening here. There's not enough promotion around that. And I think just some ambiguity as to what the identity of Danbury is. It's just not being strongly communicated. So I think there's some real opportunity there for some sort of promotional campaign, better communication and messaging on behalf of the city. And that's not limited just to the arts and historic resources. That I think is to everything. It can be applied to, you know, Parks and Rec and all the other things that the city's doing. It's economic development work as well. Okay, any comments, questions before we move on to open space and natural resources? Okay. All right. Open space, environmental resources. We talked about some of the challenges that are afflicting Danbury and a lot of communities in Connecticut, whether it be invasive species or forest management. Really the need to protect more property in Danbury. Danbury has a lot of open space. Not all of it is protected, which means that it could, if its ownership were to change hands or its owners were to have a different set of priorities, it could potentially be developed. And the way to help protect that is for either for the city to acquire, or for a land trust to acquire, or for somebody to purchase development rights via a conservation easement or some other arrangement. That's something that that we need to maintain a focus on. We can't take all of that open space for granted that it's going to remain open space forever, if not protected. So that needs to be a prioritization. Continuing to protect the environment through good communication with residents is a priority. The city is pretty much mandated to do this already through its MS4 stormwater management program, to do outreach and education surrounding the protection of waterways. But we heard from people in our discussion that that's an ongoing problem, particularly residents up against the reservoirs or some of the lakes, with not maintaining proper buffers and concerns about runoff and use of chemicals on lawns, that sort of thing. We talked about the fact the city has limited resources and staff to address issues such as forest health, and really the city's forestry staff is kept busy by cutting down trees that are safety hazards or have already fallen, for that matter, and that there's probably a lot more need in this area to address forest health and trees across the city, particularly with invasive pests such as emerald ash borer and some other tree pests as well. We also talked about the various commissions and groups that are engaged in managing open space and natural resources, and they're of course all volunteer based. Not all of them meet regularly. It can be fairly resource intensive to staff all these different meetings. And so there was some discussion around the need to consolidate or better manage all these entities and organizations. So the idea is, here it is, commissions need to be consolidated to better function. And we didn't talk about specific commissions, but the city, of course, has you have your environmental impact commission, and of course you have planning and zoning over here, and then you have the various park or lake authorities, and so there's definitely has to be some sort of opportunity there for those various boards, commissions, and committees to work a little more closely together and reduce the workload on staff and supporting those entities. We talked about the need for continued partnerships with conservation groups like land trusts, and of course there's the local land trust, and the question is, is there a good enough partnership or collaboration with local land trust? Danbury needs to provide more protected open space. We talked about that already. You have a big inventory, but potentially need more of it to be protected. And that doesn't necessarily imply that the city is purchasing more land, but rather that there's just more land protected through other means. And for the need for growth to be sustainable. So this is a plan of conservation and development, but I think there's a strong interest in the development part of that, ensuring that the development part of that is sustainable, and that new development doesn't compromise drinking water quality, drinking water resources, that it's not eating into your most valuable open space and natural resource areas. And finally, the need for a plan for forest stewardship and management. And not too many communities have actually conducted this type of plan, but they can be incredibly valuable when conducted. They're often conducted by universities that have the expertise necessary to inventory and survey forest health and help guide the city towards good stewardship. So we talked about that. The need to, I would say, continue educating homeowners, because there is education around water quality through the MS4 program. And the need to do some restoration of wetland areas. And we didn't talk about any specific wetland areas. I do think there's the perception that development that occurred 10, 20, 30 years ago is having impacts on wetlands because of the failure to maintain some of the stormwater control systems associated with those developments, a lot of them being subdivisions or condo developments. And the need to continue to maintain, monitor those, and ensure that any wetland areas that are impacted are restored. All right, so that's what we heard from our focus group meetings. Anyone have any questions or comments?
I do.
Francisco?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll go. I'm going to go with Richard first and then work our way down the line. Richard, go ahead.
Thank you. On one of your earliest slides, I think it had to do with the housing. There was a bullet point that I thought was very important, where it said I think it was to get the landlords of the properties down there involved. I think it's very important with regard to downtown. Let's say, as an example, if there's a vision as to, after all of these facts are evaluated, if there's a vision, and I think that's the number one priority for us, is to create the image of Danbury in the future of 10 years as to what kind of a city we want it to be. And if you take the downtown and to say we'd like the downtown to be a combination of a thriving community, being residential, being restaurants and commercial, etc. I think it's important that the stakeholders who own the property down there be involved in this particular project, so that they could see what benefit it may or may not be to them. And also that we, at least we recommend something where perhaps we feel we have the support of stakeholders that are there that want to move forward in the same direction as we see the future of Danbury. The other point is, and again, I go back to, what do we want Danbury to be in the future? I don't know what theme or image it is. It is now. There's probably 10 different reasons or 10 different images you would get from people. But in any event, I think going forward, that's something we should capture. The other thing, there's a lot of information on there with regard to schools, expansions, and with regard to housing. I think, again, in participation with regard to the schools, you have the input from the superintendent, on a one-to-one conversation. I don't know who in a committee or in City Hall would do that. I think you would get some other insight as to what the possibilities are, or what his feelings are, or what his challenges are, so that at least we'd be in a better position when we recommend something to know that we have it with the backing of people that are responsible, for that particular area. It's easy to say we need new schools and we're going to build this, and this. That takes care of a current situation, but we're not looking at a current situation. And basically, when we build schools, they're always built on historical stuff that doesn't allow for a current population. By the time we get into the school, it's overcrowded to begin with. So I'm just saying, I guess in essence, that we try to reach out to the stakeholders in some of these major issues to get them involved and get their feelings on it, so they're on the same page as we are. so that the right hand and the left hand, or at least are in sync.
Yeah, if I could just jump in for a second, Francisco. I mean,
Yeah.
we did attempt to do that, and I think we've succeeded in many aspects during these focus group meetings. For instance, the superintendent was on the discussion on city, I think he was in city facilities, right, Francisco? I can't,
Yeah.
they all merge into one big meeting,
Yeah.
one big week of meetings. But I mean, I think we all learned a lot from Kevin's input. And a willing participant as we move forward in all of this. In the same respect, Sharat from CD and Smith on behalf of Condot relative to kind of what's going on 84 and what their plans are. So I think that is happening. You might not see every aspect of it, but that's been a real goal of mine and our departments and the cities. I'm trying to get as much input from the key stakeholders as possible as we move throughout the process, as we learn, as we plan.
Well, I think that's a great accomplishment, Sharon, and I think their opinions are valued so that at least they're in sync with us. So.
Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
to jump in, I agree with Sharon. I mean, the superintendent of schools was on with us, and he was very clear what his challenges are. He's got 12,000 kids in the school system and nowhere to put them. And he spends most of his day shuffling kids back and forth between schools just to try to get them indoors. So, no, I think we did reach out to him, and we know exactly what his challenges are.
Okay.
And
Now come up with some solutions.
Well, this is our opportunity to lay the groundwork.
well, the solutions are there. I mean, there's all kinds of proposals. They're trying to buy 2 pods at the summit, which is actually where I'm sitting right now, and to bring the Career Academy up there to take some of the pressure off the high school. So there are ideas. They just opened that one on Osborne Street, name escapes me, but no, the superintendent laid out exactly what his challenges are and what he's doing to address them.
Okay, fine. So long as you know what they are, and then we just have to focus on, as we do in these other areas, to try to facilitate the practicality of accomplishing them.
And with
Yep.
regard to downtown, I mean, we can all have a vision for what we want downtown to look like, but most of the buildings down there are privately owned. So, I mean, it's a lot of these owners downtown have a decision to make. Are they going to invest? Or are they going to just let their buildings sit there the way they are now? And if they decide on plan 2, just let them sit there, there's not a heck of a lot we can do with vision. We can't compel anyone to do anything legally. So
yeah,
we hope we have entrepreneurs with a vision for the future downtown but if you don't, you don't.
Sure. As you, I wasn't ridiculing anybody, but as you reached out to Kevin, the same thing. My point was, with some of the people, the landlords downtown, if conversations with them had started or could be started as to at least what we feel our vision is, they may see a benefit to it. I understand you can't force them to change, change their mind, but it's just opening up a communication dialogue. That's it. If you want to use that as the school issue as an example, that's fine. That was my only point. I know because I reached out to Kevin and mentioned that you guys would be calling, so I'm a little bit closer to the school situation than I am to other aspects as to where you are and what you've done so far.
Joel, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, I don't know where I am in the queue there.
Go ahead, Joel. Go ahead.
I'm going to do the opposite that Rich did. I want to go to the end of the presentation. In fact, I think it was almost the very last line of your slides and my personal experience. Let's see there. Should make developers promise to restore. Yeah, I had to stop right there to do restoration as soon as I read the word promise. It may sound a little jaded, but it's reality. I found that you can't depend on anything that a developer promises because there's no commitment no enforceable commitment. You got to get it in writing, and there has to be consequences for failure. I mean, you don't do this, you don't get your permits to build. It's just, it's the idea of asking them to promise to do something.
Yeah.
It's just trying to, carry water in a sieve.
And as a reminder, these are kind of more or less paraphrasing what we heard from participants. And you make a good point that that's not where we can leave it, right? That including an idea like this in the POCD doesn't do us any good, because there's no accountability with a statement like this. So our job, if we think this is an important issue, our job in the plan is to figure out how to ensure that happens. What kind of regulations do you need to have in place to ensure that that type of activity is actually conducted?
Yep.
All right, anything else on the focus group meetings? And then I do want to briefly review what we heard
Francisco,
from our affordable housing plan. Go ahead, Paul.
I just had one minor comment, but after listening to a couple of previous comments, I have something to add. In terms of Arnie and Richard's comment about Main Street, there is some evidence that city policies have impacted what private property owners wanted to do with their buildings. So while Arnie's right that it is basically a private property situation, Richard is also right, and that the city does have some culpability, if you want to call it that, in terms of the direction that the city went after the 90s and 00s, in terms of particularly in terms of the High Street Entertainment District. That's something that needs to be looked at. I'm no expert on downtown entertainment districts, but it's clear that we have passed some ordinances that would certainly affect what would be allowable in those circumstances, and that may need to be reevaluated. In terms of what Joel mentioned about getting it in writing, I mean, it's just so true. I mean, as recently as this month, EIC accepted a petition for a local building with some conditions, and one of those conditions were, water we're talking about here. One of those conditions were that the property would need to be inspected on a weekly basis. Yeah, good luck with that. Ben Chinazi and I were faced with a situation in the 6th Ward, a very large presence in the 6th Ward wanted a change of use for one of their buildings and needed an accommodation from the city. And we looked at their layout and we realized that their stormwater mitigation really hadn't been managed in a decade. And so we asked them to fix that before we would go forward, and they did. But had we not had that leverage, they probably would not have fixed it. They might have, but it might have required a civil action.
Right.
And that brings me to what I was actually going to talk about originally, which is a minor point in terms of the overall POCD, but it's central actually to the function of the POCD. And that's the last slide about combining land use boards. I have not been sold on, or maybe more to the point, I'm not sold on the philosophy that by combining land use boards results in a better product. There's a town adjacent to us that has their land use boards combined, and I go to those land use meetings. And basically, you've got the big four in one room at one night: EIC, ZBA, planning, and zoning. It's one commission. And I'm not sure that would be the way. It might work for a smaller town. I'm not sure that it would work for a town the size of Danbury, or maybe more to the point, a town going through the kind of developmental upheaval or potential that Danbury is going through. There's some smaller ones. You mentioned Kenosha. And we have a commission that addresses that. It meets yearly. It's going to be meeting this month, I think. It's called GERC, the Government Entities Review Commission, where we can sunset or re-up some of these commissions and make recommendations that they might want to combine But in terms of the big four in Danbury, yeah, I see ZBA, zoning and planning. I would be very resistant to see them combined. I think they function much more. I was on one of them, and I go to these meetings constantly. And you really do wear different hats. I mean, Arnie is pretty much concerned with, foundations and slopes and grades and roof angles and building height. And zoning is really legislative. That's a zoning and planning are really, really different. We say
Right.
planning and zoning all the time like it's one thing,
Right.
but the business of those commissions are fundamentally opposed. It's almost like church and state, or almost like the executive and the legislative. They really do have very different goals and very different purposes. Oh, man, these phones are just driving me nuts. Excuse me. I can't. I'm sorry about that. It's been all day. EIC, of course, purely water. And as you mentioned, Danbury's a little hilly. Yeah, it's also soaking wet, even at the tops of hills. We have vernal pools. Water is everywhere. And every time there's development, it winds up running down into somebody's basement. The EIC is critical, and I think really needs to remain focused on that, on water. And ZBA, of course, is the court of last resort. When other things may not have functioned properly, you go to ZBA and try to get something overturned, at least in a sort of an ad hoc fashion, essentially specifically located to one issue. So my position on this would be to keep them separate, and that's, I just wanted to get that out there. Thanks.
Yeah,
And I'm
if
sorry
I could
about the
just
phones.
if I could just interject, I think the discussion from the participants in the groups was not associated with the big four. It was
Oh, okay.
more of kind of all the other, there's a lot of other commissions and authorities and things like that, but not,
Right.
let's just call them the four families.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you though that, I mean, in conversations with Dennis going back to the
Yeah.
90s,
Yeah,
there has always been in this city a
Yes.
sort of like, we're kind of almost always on the precipice of considering combining or aggregating them, and I've just never seen the work in terms of what it would mean to Danbury. Reading, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Reading guy, but in terms of Danbury, I think they function better when they're separate.
yeah. Many years ago in a charter revision, there was some
Yeah.
consideration, I think, way back in the 90s, late 90s. But the focus again in these discussions had to do with kind of all of the other commissions, not the four families.
And I'll just jump in.
I would
I'm-
second
if I-
Paul's comments about consolidation.
Arnie,
This is Arnie. I'll just jump in real quick. Being the answer to a trivia question, I have served both on planning and zoning. I think I'm the only one, and I agree with what Mr. Rotello said. Two separate and distinct sets of duties and responsibilities, no reason to combine.
gotcha.
Got it. Anything else from what we heard from focus groups?
I'm sorry, could Arnie just repeat what he said? It was my phone again.
You said something about you being right.
Well, I'll just say it again. Yeah, I said I agreed with your observations. I made a joke. I said I'm the answer to a trivia question. I've been on planning and zoning in two separate, distinct sets of responsibilities. And long story short, you're right. I see no compelling reason to combine the two.
Yeah, they really are. Okay, thanks, Arnie. I didn't hear it. Thanks.
No problem.
I just want to make a quick comment
Yeah.
about labor and economic development. One, because I spent a couple of years with the state up there. I saw that there were some comments about veterans hiring, or at least increasing the workforce. It might not be a bad idea to connect with the state Office of Veterans Workforce Development, because when you have initiatives like that, a lot of times it comes from the state. So there are programs, there are tax credits, federal and state tax credits that residents just don't know about, or maybe business owners just don't know about. But it is more of it is a huge issue in itself. But the solution is to reach out to the state and see what incentives they offer and they have. And we also have not a lot of cities have their own veterans department. Danbury does, and we actually have a great one. So, a solution for that portion of your presentation or the focus groups issues is maybe to reach out to our state partners and see what they offer. And connect them with our office of economic development.
Yeah, and it may be that work or service is already being provided by Veterans Affairs. This once again comes back to the fact that a lot of people really just don't know everything that's being provided by the city or offered by the city. There's just the communication or the awareness isn't there. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area. But yeah, I think pointing people to where the existing programs resources are, particularly if they're state provided, is the first place to look.
And the other thing I saw that was kind of interesting to me was the micro housing. Is that what it was called? Micro living situations?
Yeah.
So the last year I spent up at the state was making a proposal for veterans housing. They're pretty much micro housing, so it's independent living. It's to encourage independent living in a community type environment. And I'll tell you that a couple other states have been very successful with that, and they were able to be lenient with their own ordinances and state housing laws. So that's something that you might want to look into. Just use as a pilot program is veterans housing. That could lead to bigger and better things. Just an idea or a thought.
This is Arnie. Just wanted to throw in one thing on the transportation idea. The more I hear about this Maybrook line, the more I like it. I think, Francisco, you described it as a one-seat ride from Danbury to Grand Central. I think that would be a tremendous asset to the city. I like that phrase, one-seat ride. I think people hate changing trains, and if that could happen, it would change things. You'd be able to get from Danbury to New York City without changing trains. It would take some of the pressure off of 84. I don't know how a group like us can get that thought moving forward, but regardless, I just think it's a great idea, and it would change the city. It would help many different levels.
Well, I can tell you that it's a very good idea to address that in the POCD. And if this is something that the city is really, really in favor of, that this committee thinks is a good idea, that we specifically point to that project and the potential that it holds, advocate for it, and look at opportunities surrounding that. So the project proposes a co-location of a station downtown and then at least one station on the west side. And we can get ahead of that to some degree and do some of the visioning around what the opportunities are. And it may suggest that there's some zoning work that needs to be done. By example, a lot of the recommendations of the TOD study are even more relevant with expanded service. And to the extent we can in the plan, we should lay some of the groundwork for that, so that if and when the service is being initiated and they're going through their own studies, you have a plan that is supporting it and laying some of the groundwork for it.
Francisco, this is Vinny.
Vinny.
Just a couple quick comments. I'm not looking to repeat what others are saying, but along the lines of what Paul and Arnie were talking about, with keeping commissions, separate, and how we do it in Danbury with the Big Four and all of that. I completely agree. We have unique needs and good processes there. When it comes to the education side, there was some commentary already with Mr. Walston being able to provide the insight of what's necessary, and what Arnie was talking about with what we have proposed for the Career Academy and all of those things happening and currently being worked on are really long-term solutions to that. That's a big piece of the plan. So to note that those things are in process and very active and imminent are excellent, along with the other expansions on the Ellsworth, campus and whatnot. And then when it comes to the, sorry, what we were just talking about with downtown and between the transit-oriented development study and the Maybrook line and those type of things that are also very much, not just in process, but happening with all of the sidewalks and the new work being done downtown, and the Maybrook side where there's, been studies funded and processes in place with all of that, and seeing what can happen, and some real recent articles on those as well with some West Side development. So all great things, all things I would say well underway. Plus, for something like the POCD that's happening, not just things for us to recommend, for things for us to note in there that are currently in process, not just horizon type of items, but real things happening right now.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Anyone else?
Just very quickly, Perry here. I couldn't agree more. The comments on the Maybrook line, and in terms of our vision for downtown coming true and becoming a reality, that's the biggest key, the biggest factor I could possibly see to really jump us forward. Thank you.
All right. Okay, well, let's keep moving forward. I do want to briefly review the discussion in the affordable housing group. And as a reminder, we're running a parallel process for the affordable housing plan. We've got a committee guiding us in that. And around the same time we did these focus group meetings, we did a virtual public workshop that was really very similar in format to the focus group meetings, specific to affordable housing. And this is what came out of the discussion. We heard that out-of-state residents with high incomes have been moving to Danbury since beginning COVID, and probably, preceding that, of course, but really a big spike in that migration during COVID, and is driving up housing costs because there's limited supply. It's supply and demand economics. The eviction rate is, of course, going up because moratorium on evictions is lifted, and there's concern about people being displaced. There's of course big concern about a lower income population and their ability to continue to afford housing, and that's not just limited to lower income families, also to young adults who have low incomes and are starting off their career, and they have limited housing choice in Danbury. We briefly talked about the homeless issue, and I think we kind of worked through that, and so that was a very important discussion that needed to be had. And then when we talked about ideas, we started with really the need to accommodate seniors with more housing options that are affordable. Housing in and near downtown, that's walkable distance to places, has access to transit, smaller units, units that are accessible, first floor or some other means of accessibility. We talked about establishing requirements for the inclusion of affordable housing in new developments. Stanford has a below market rate program where they have basically a requirement to provide what they call below market rate housing. The city does not currently have any sort of requirement, and that's something we will be taking a look at. One of the ideas was to place affordable housing near transit and economic centers such as the downtown, and to ensure that the zoning regulations support development of housing in those areas. And once again, this goes back to households with limited income and limited means may not be able to afford to own a vehicle. If they do have to own a vehicle, it reduces their ability to afford housing. So co-locating that housing with transit and near jobs makes a lot more sense. And so we talked about housing downtown and transportation options for seniors already. the need for Danbury to have more aging in place housing and workforce housing as well. We talked about housing, what's called multi-generation housing, that enables a senior to live with their children and have their own private space, and just the need to ensure that the zoning is supportive of that type of housing. And yeah, that rounded out our discussion. We still have a lot of work to do in this area where we have yet to really start committing to any of these policy ideas, but that's really what we're going to be working on in our next meeting, which is coming up shortly. Any questions or comments?
This is Arnie. I found that discussion on housing very telling and very eye-opening, particularly as a guy on the planning commission. And Francisco, correct me if I'm wrong, that I think it was the last meeting you said that according to the best data you have, Danbury is going to need about 5,000 additional housing units, 5,000. And, you know, and that's on one side. On the other side, Danbury, 72% of the land in Danbury is in a single family residential zone. So we have land. It's just not zoned properly for any sort of density or housing developments. That was one thing. And the other thing you pointed out was, if you don't build these units, you go back to the old supply and demand curve that we all learned, you know, economics 101, you know, where price is the x-axis and quantities. And if you don't have the supply, the demand will go up and it will raise prices for everybody. And that hurts people, particularly down at the lower end of the scale. So there's a consequence to not building them. So how do you build these necessary housing units that we all agree we need and protect the integrity of a single family residential neighborhood? That, you know, it's back to what somebody said earlier. It's easy to articulate the problems. It's the solutions that are tough. And that was a very interesting presentation. And the solution will be tricky.
Yeah, our sub-consultant RKG and Eric Halverson, they ran they did some of the modeling with respect to housing need and the number of units you'd need to keep up with the population growth that you've had. And in short, the takeaway from that is that you need to be able to continue providing units at all price points, market rate, and ideally affordable housing, a certain share of affordable housing alongside that market rate. Because by introducing more market rate units, you're adding supply. And so that helps you keep up with demand, which helps stabilize prices, and in turn ensures that the supply of housing at the lower end of the cost spectrum stays within that range and continues to be affordable. And if you don't have development, and assuming demand is still there, and demand appears to be strong for the foreseeable future, and it may be even stronger with the introduction of something like a Maybrook line, then costs just go up and the city becomes less affordable. So a program similar to Stanford's, where you provide some real incentives for high density housing that makes that type of development feasible, you know, financially feasible for developer and attractive, and requiring a certain percentage of affordable units to be built in as part of that supply, helps you address both of those at the same time. You're increasing supply, so it keeps demand in check, and then you're directly adding supply to your affordable supply. So I think that program probably holds some promise for Danbury, and it's something we should look at more closely.
Francisco?
Yes.
In one of the first slides of this subsection here, you referenced Danbury is not a hub for homeless people. I was just curious as to what did you base that comment on?
Well, this wasn't my comment. This was feedback that we received directly from in our discussion. And we were responding to, and let me give you some context. Through our survey, our POCD survey, we received some feedback from the public with some real concerns about, at the time, the Super 8 shelter, and real concerns about Danbury turning into a magnet, or Danbury playing its role in the region at addressing the region's homelessness issues. And Ari spoke up briefly about, I don't know how many of you know Ari, and I forget Ari's affiliation. Sharon, Ari's association, the name is
He's
escaping
the
me.
executive director at ARC, the Association of Religious
you.
Communities.
Yeah, thank you. So Ari, I was quite informed about this issue, and I think he correctly pointed out that that Danbury is not disproportionately attracting people from outside the city and across the region just because it provides services to the unsheltered. And that's basically what this is getting at.
Yeah, that's not what real life experience has been, well, over the last decade. Maybe it's different now. But there were towns like Brookfield that were sending them to us.
Yeah. Okay.
Francisco,
Paul, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't want to, get into a debate with Ari about this, but I mean, if you're surrounded by communities that simply don't have any process to process the homeless, and you do, common sense would dictate that you would be one of the communities that the homeless would go to. In addition to that, if you have a not-for-profit organization that recently purchased at great expense and has to service a building that can handle 2 to 3 times what the homeless population in Danbury would need, it stands to reason that they might fill that up with people who are not from Danbury. So, there may be some truth or a lot of truth in what Ari is saying, but I think that the situation on the ground would have a tendency of funneling the homeless from surrounding communities into this one. Connecticut got rid of county government in the 50s, and it's been trying to put it back together for the last 60 years. And we don't call it county anymore, we call it region. And I think there's something like 17 or 18 regions. There were 8 counties. There's 17 or 18 regions, and everybody kind of realizes that's too many. They're trying to knock that down to something approaching what the old county units used to be. It'll probably wind up at somewhere around like 12 regions. And Danbury will probably be the regional seat as opposed to the county seat for this particular area. And with that comes some expectations, and that's something that we need to come to terms with, because we need to direct that as opposed to be directed by it by forces outside of Danbury. And I think it's not, I don't want to concentrate on the homeless, but I mean, this has to do with everything, whether it's becoming a nexus for our sewer system. We're thinking about bringing in effluent from New York. We already are, from Ridgefield, from New Fairfield, from surrounding communities. Everything sort of takes place in Danbury. We've got the facilities for it. So the state says, well, why not use it? Why there's this constant refrain about how Danbury is this collection of 169 fiefdoms where everybody is completely intransigent and unwilling to share any power. And you just wind up repeating the same, money sucking jobs throughout the state that could be combined. And they're, right now the pressure may be off because the state of Connecticut's doing okay in terms of its revenue, but there will be times shortly, probably, where the state will be, going through the couch cushions looking for quarters, and they will, one of the savings that they will look at is the money that flows to all the municipalities, which ironically comes from the municipalities.
Right.
But we'll leave that aside for the moment. But yeah, I mean, Danbury, there will be continuing pressure, and this ties into the POCD, about Danbury becoming a regional hub, the regional seat. Call it the county seat if it makes it easier. It's not going to be Fairfield, it's going to be Danbury. And
Right.
homeless and water and sewer and electric and, you know, the peaker plants and all those kinds of things will want to be located in Danbury. And there may be benefits in doing that, but it's something that we need, at people who are managing the city need to take a very close look at, to make sure that whatever we acquiesce to is in the best interests of our constituents, regardless of what, I don't want to use the term activist, but regardless of what people outside the community think might be the best for Western Connecticut. At the end of the day, it winds up in Danbury. And while the benefits may be spread about Western Connecticut, the detriments, if there are any, accrue solely to the constituents that we represent. And we need to be very careful about that. Thanks.
Understood.
Hey, Francisco. Yeah, I just given you a heads up on the time, and I really want to get into the discussion about the themes. So I'm not trying to hold anybody back, but this is going to be a good one. So
Okay. Yeah. So let's thank you, Sharon. Let's move on. We've covered all that ground. So now here we are. Here is the moment where we have done 90+% of our information gathering and asking people what they think and what kind of ideas they have. And now we need to start committing to some of these big ideas and what it is we want to accomplish in the plan. And it starts right here. The first step in this process for us, the way we're approaching it, is to identify what those big themes are that transcend all these very specific issues that are all tied together in some way. And so first of all, what is a theme? And I just want to make sure we're all speaking the same language. A theme is basically an organizing principle by which we can present and gather all these different topics and issues and ideas and make sense of them all. And the concept of a lens, if you've ever done planning, sometimes the idea of a lens is used, a lens that you look through and everything kind of makes sense as you're looking through it, through that lens. A lens is very similar. A lens, however, suggests looking at things through a single perspective with a focus. And a theme is just a way to organize a lot of ideas. And we are for the time being, very receptive and open to different ways of organizing the plan and all these different ideas. But this is where we would like to start. And first of all, it's important that whatever themes we identify and the way we respond to them and are consistent with our vision statement. And it's been a little while since we talked about this and we put it in front of you. And I'm not going to read it all now, but here it is. And our vision statement really lays out what's important to us and where we want to go. This is the big idea. And so as we continue our work, we want to check it against this vision statement periodically to make sure either that we remain consistent with it, or if we start to lean in a different direction, that we're updating this vision statement to ensure that it supports what it is that we're advocating for. All right, so themes. We've been in the process throughout the plan of gathering all the information and organizing it. And I could tell you, after having reviewed just about all of it, there's half a dozen or so themes that really seem to come forward. And so we tried to capture it right here and in ideas, in words. And here they are. So expand, improve, promote, adapt, protect, focus, connect, partner, invest. And I'm going to go through these one by one. And as I do, speak up. Let me know what you think and whether or not you feel we've got our heads wrapped around this in the right way. So start with protect. So what does protect mean? Well, Danbury will protect its resources with special attention focused towards its most vulnerable resources and residents. And so we start with a statement about what protect means and what does it mean for the plan. And that's the statement. We can continue to refine, adjust, expand these statements as necessary, but this is where we're starting from. And specifically, what does that mean? Protect environmental resources, protect neighborhoods, protect historic resources, and protect vulnerable residents. A lot of what we heard from the community can fit into these ideas, these themes. So protect environmental resources, when we heard protect open space, protect water quality, that falls into this. Protect neighborhoods means protect neighborhoods against development. It means it can be as specific as we heard a lot of concerns about enforcement of the noise ordinance and quality of life surrounding noise. Protect neighborhoods from environmental pollution such as noise. Protect historic resources means protect those buildings that are need reinvestment and improvement. Protect vulnerable residents means to ensure they have housing, that they have the services they need. This could be unsheltered residents, residents living at the property line. So this is a way that we envision we can organize the plan. And Sharon and I have talked a little bit about how that would look in terms of the actual format of the plan and outline, and there's some work to be done there. And at next month's meeting, we want to come back to you with the plan roughed out, its outline, maybe some examples of how this would lay out on the page. We remain open to ideas as to how to do that. One of the ideas I discussed with Sharon was potentially organizing the plan in sections, and each section would be a theme. So one section of the document, the theme would be protect, and all of the specific policy recommendations of our plan that support and relate to protecting resources would be located and addressed, discussed, presented in that section. And then of course we'd move on to the next theme. And then we also talked about the potential to go a more traditional route with the plan and organize it by topic area, by transportation, and then housing and infrastructure and facilities, that sort of organization. In which case we can also use the idea of themes with, we could color code use text or symbols to color code so that you understand how that specific recommendation ties into the bigger picture. So any specific recommendation for zoning or a policy or whatever it may be might be color coded with a symbol that shows it's green and it relates to protecting resources. So there are some different ways we could do that, but we're starting with the way we're going to organize all these ideas is in these themes. And so I'll continue to go through those, and as I go, let me know if you have any questions. If we're missing something, the idea of protect, or is there something else that should be on this list? Is there more that needs to be protected? Right, so feel free to speak up. Anything else on protect before I move forward? Okay, promote. Danbury will promote all that it has to offer. Promote arts and culture, and obviously just talked about that. That came right out of our focus group meeting. Promote city programs, services, and initiatives. And this goes back to, this is something we've been talking about for a long time, that people really aren't aware of all that it is the city is doing and has to offer. Promote Danbury's businesses, right? That comes out of our economic development discussions. Any comments or ideas related to promotion? Okay, expand. Danbury will expand opportunities and options presented to its residents. Expand housing supply and options. Expand school capacity. Expand mobility options. Expand economic opportunities. So these are broad concepts, but you could see how some very specific ideas or policies could fit into these. Expand mobility. The idea of the Maybrook line is expanding mobility. Building out more sidewalks is also expanding mobility. Building out bike infrastructure is expanding mobility. Expanding economic opportunities means attracting new businesses. It can also mean workforce development. There are a lot of ideas that we can bring together in one idea and organize in that way.
Francisco, open space, expand in
Yeah.
various ways. Maybe we should add something about that here.
Yeah,
Expand the supply of protected open space, something.
sure. And we've got that under protect too.
Right.
But I think that speaks to how this is all tied together. And the more that it's tied together, I think the stronger the plan, because it suggests that we're all these things are really important and they're all interconnected, interrelated, and they should all be moving things in the same direction. So yeah, expanding open space also suggests protecting open space, and these things can show up in more than one theme. And it may be that where we have ideas, policies that are hitting a lot of themes and showing up in a lot of themes, it may be that that's helping point to what some of the higher priority items are, items we should weight more heavily, and items that may be more urgent for the city to take action on.
Francisco, I know we're on the expand. I was thinking about some of the others as we're going. I think it'll be maybe easier or more practical once we see all of them and where they are. If we see things that are missing, and maybe at the next meeting we have, come back to this, and that way we fill in some blanks once we see it all and where they go. Because I may be thinking of one that's more appropriate in another area. I just don't know what the other area is yet until we review it. So, but I like
absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, let's get through it. And then, as we normally do, we'll circulate this presentation, put it up on the website, and you can dig into it a little more. And then when we come back to you next month, we're going to come back with some very specific ideas about how this might be formatted in the plan, how it would lay out on the page. And then, and at which point we can talk about inserting some more themes or ideas into this.
Can I interrupt?
Richard, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
To pick up on Vinny's point, would it be good between now and the next meeting, once we get the information relative to today's meeting, that we would be able to email perhaps yourself and Sharon or whoever you elect to have it sent to with our ideas, so that at the next meeting, you will then have some sort of collaboration of the input of the committee and add it further, so that you, in the interest of saving time, and I think it's a good idea, once we have this in front of us and able to digest it, we can give you our comments. You can incorporate them in a different text or font, and we can expand on it at the next meeting.
Absolutely, yes.
So would the appropriate person be to Sharon and yourself? I mean, I don't want to inundate.
Yeah, Sharon, you want
people.
that to go to you or to Jennifer or
Yeah, you can send it to me and I'll forward it to you. I mean, I was thinking while you were talking that maybe we give you obviously the presentation, but a matrix with all the 6 and the bullets in each 6 so you can see it kind of on one big,
Sure.
you don't have to
we
flip
can
around the
do that.
pages.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yep.
I also wanted to just say, and Arnie and Joel, Perry, Bob, you get this because this is what we do. You know, we have to have a document that's something, and Francisco and I spoke about this as well, that we can use when we review things, when we review applications that come in. So we have to have a document that is usable, not just for us, but for the public. So, you know, how do we review an application? You know, we as you know, we go through the sections and we can pinpoint the sections, and we need to be able to continue to do our work with a document that helps us do that in kind of an organized manner. So I'm thinking about, you know, the usability of it as well as we lay it out.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think what we don't want to do, which is the easy thing to do, and you'll see plenty of examples of plans of this, is that the plan is just a list of things that need to be done. And it doesn't really put it all together. You know, many plans don't really put it all together into a clear vision that helps people understand what the big ideas are and why all those things are on the list. It just seems a to-do list of a bunch of things. And while we definitely, there are going to be a lot, there certainly will be lists in this plan, and there's a lot that needs to be done. We want to make sense of it for people and have them understand the big ideas and how all of these things are connected.
Sure. Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
Okay, so you know, this evening it's just going to be an introduction. We'll walk you through it, and we'll follow up with this presentation. What I'll go ahead and do, and Sharon had a really good idea, is to take these and put it into one place, on one page, one sheet of matrix, and you could really, you know, study it, and we're very receptive to your ideas on what to add, what to cross off, whatever it may be. Okay, next is focus. Danbury will focus its investments and development. Focus on the downtown. Focus development where infrastructure will support it. And focus limited resources. Anything else that jumps to mind when you think about focus for the city? Okay, I'll keep going. Connect. Connect residents to resources. Connect workforce to jobs. Connect students to the community. Connect open space. Connect places within Danbury, and connect to the region. And once again, connecting to the region, that can mean a lot of things. You know, improving I-84 improves connections to the region. The Maybrook line connects to the region. There are ways maybe to better connect to the region virtually as well. Maybe connecting to the region means comes via partnerships and governance. And so there's a lot that we could fit into that idea.
Just a quick comment, more to Sharon. The last 20 years, there's been a lot of open space acquisition, and I don't think that went without guidance. And I was just wondering is there anything in your desk that needs to be dusted off about Danbury's perspective on, do we grab everything that's available, or you know, somebody walks in the door and says, I have 15 acres out here, you wanted to buy it for open space. It may or may not be what we had in mind, but I just wondered if you had anything in your desk.
Oh yeah,
That-
we'll take a look at the old plans. There was an open space, a list of preferred properties that Jack Kozahowski, if some of you remember, worked on when he was in the health department and then as a consultant for the city. Some of those have been purchased, like the Whitell property, purchased and or donated. So again, you know, we'll go back and we'll look at all of that and see, you know, what's happened and what still is on the list and see where we go from there and see, you know, how that all relates to kind of what we're talking about. But yes, dusting off, yes. And I have all of that. I have Dennis's work for 20 something years and before him as well. So.
Yeah, and if I may, there's been, you know, a desire to acquire some stuff in the northern part of Danbury and also some stuff in the southern part too. That's been on a you know, like a wish list for decades.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, this makes sense?
Yes.
All right, we'll keep going. Improve. Of course, this could be a big list. We try to get these lists from being too big, and when they start to get unwieldy, it's hard to see the big picture. So we'll merge some of these bullets if this list gets too big and into a bigger idea that can carry more. But improve. Danbury will improve the services and facilities that it provides to its residents, and that means improving communications, improving traffic operations, and safety. And maybe that's an example right here. We should maybe instead say improve traffic operations and safety. Improve pedestrian facilities, improve parks and public spaces, improve infrastructure, improve the city's operations.
Francisco, did you go over, did we get up to promote yet? Because I don't know. I don't remember if you passed it. Did you pass it?
Yeah, I blew right through it. Yeah, I'll go back real quick. Promote arts and culture, program services and initiatives.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking promote itself.
Yeah.
So, but I guess that falls in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
that second line, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Francisco, either in focus or promote, I would think maybe include something about our identity or our image, whatever that may be, whatever we determine it to be.
We're kind of backing into that, aren't we?
Exactly.
Okay. We'll figure that out by the time we get to the end. After months of soul searching here, I think we'll have that pinned down, hopefully. Adapt. Danbury will adapt to changing conditions. Adapt to a growing population, adapt to climate change, adapt to an evolving economy, adapt to mobility trends, adapt to demographic shifts.
We have no choice.
Right. There's
Well, I mean, you know, we could resist some of this stuff, and there may be, some communities do, so that we keep that in the back of our mind. It's not that the constituents will roll over to every single thing that comes along. So there may be some of that in the future, at least tempered. But yeah, basically, Joel's right. We don't have a lot of choice here. We got to figure this out.
And even if you're a community that, let's say your vision and goal is to keep things the same, there's a lot of work that you have to do to keep things the same. So adaptation doesn't necessarily mean that you become a different community. It could just mean that you need to make some changes to preserve or protect what it is that you hold valuable about the community. All right. Partner. Danbury will foster partnerships, partner with surrounding communities, partner with institutions, partner with the private sector, and partner with its residents. That makes sense?
Yeah, I just hope that partnering with surrounding communities is a two-way street, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. We don't have all the solutions for some of these. Yeah, I mean, for some of them, we know exactly what needs to be done because we've discussed it. It's we know from our work experience in other communities what could or should be done. Some of these ideas are in response to what we've heard or need that we see, and we don't yet have the policy solution or the recommendation for them. But that's the work that remains to be done, is to dig into that, to do some research and to put some ideas forward as to, well, what does it mean to partner with surrounding communities? You know, how does that work? What does that look like? Partnership for what reason? That's what we would need to provide the detail on. All right, invest. Danbury will invest in its future. Invest in Danbury's youth, and that could mean a lot of things. What the most obvious, I think, is building more schools or classrooms. But it also may mean some different things. It may mean more youth programming, Parks and Rec. Invest in Danbury's workforce. Invest in sustainable practices. Invest in downtown and neighborhoods. Okay.
Well, what do you mean about invest in sustainable resources? Sustainable practices, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, by example, the city doesn't have a huge solar footprint compared to many communities. There's a lot of rooftop space and city area, land area that could be used for solar. Now, there's upfront costs associated with that, but there's a long-term dividend in terms of energy savings and environmental benefit. So in that case, an example would be spend the money to build out solar. That's the more obvious one. Another one might be energy management systems for buildings can be costly to install, but the payback on those and sometimes can be in the first year. I don't know what the status is across Danbury's buildings and schools, what kind of systems are in place, but those systems can yield a lot of energy savings. And there might be other practices as well, whether it's water use reduction, some sort of technology or practice that needs to be put in place. Investment in an electric fleet of vehicles. That's a more sustainable way for the city's workforce to get around. It's costly up front. It may be revenue neutral. Maybe it's costly up front, and maybe it doesn't yield a lot of cost savings, but it's generally a more sustainable, environmentally friendly practice. So those are a few examples.
The word infrastructure fit somewhere in here, or is an addition to?
Yeah, sure. Invest in infrastructure. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? That was the last theme. Okay. And once again, we're going to put it in front of you so you can add to it, pick it apart a little more. There may be something that it's a total oversight on our part, where there's a really important issue or an idea that's come out of our meetings, it's come out of our public engagement work that fits nowhere into one of these themes or statements, and we have a total omission. And in which case, please point it out to us. We feel like we can capture everything with these themes and these statements that we've put forward, and we can organize all of the plans, ideas, and recommendations along these lines. But if we're totally missing something, please let us know.
And let me just remind everybody that if you go to the website for the POCD, all of the I know I've sent them to you, but you know, they lost in your emails, you may have deleted them. They're all in one place. You can go through every single one of the presentations. I mean, I want to relive a whole year of everything, but they're all there. So, you know, if you want to flip through them and something, you know, occurs to you, that might be a way to find the information.
What's that website?
www.danburypocd.com.
Thank you.
We'll send it out when we send this.
Okay. Anything else on the themes before I talk about our schedule moving forward?
Go for it.
All right. So our remaining schedule, we need to start planning for the end. Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. Next month, we're going to revisit these themes, and we're going to start to organize that into some formats and outline some formats, so it starts to look a little more concrete to you. And we'll get that. Well, I want to get on the same page with all of you, because moving forward, as we start building the document, I want to move forward with confidence that it's something that you folks support, our approach, the organization of it, and how we're presenting all the big ideas. And then as we move into April, you know, coming out of March's meeting, we're going to start to build and format the document, and we'll start with the introductory section of the document that is going to introduce the public and whoever's reading it to the purpose of the plan, how it is to be used, the process that we went through, a brief summary of the engagement. And so we'll get that format, and that'll give you an opportunity to see how the document lays out, how it reads, how we're organizing it before we get too far into it. And that way, if you have any direction you want to give us, we can make some adjustments before we have the whole thing organized or formatted in a certain way. And then we're going to rough out an implementation plan. So we'll take these themes and all of the ideas that we're considering advancing, and we'll rough that out into a working list that we can work off of moving forward. And then we go into a process of working through the document section, and it may be a couple of sections at a time, meeting by meeting. So when we come back to you in May, we'll review the next section or sections of the document, and we'll focus in on the implementation plan. And really quick, the implementation plan is a section of the document. It's where we take all of the specific goals and strategies and action items that are associated with these ideas, and we consolidate them all into one section of the plan that can be a very quick reference guide for Sharon and her staff. And that's the what we need to do, and that's within the document that helps explain how it is that we've come to these recommendations, and lays the groundwork for it. So we'll be building the implementation plan, which are the very specific things that we need to do and we're going to commit to, while we start to build out and format the whole document itself. So we're going to be working both at the same time. And so that will take us through the summer. And then we want to get to the point in August where we have a draft plan. The plan is complete, but in draft form, which means it needs review, but all of it is there. And we will share that with the Planning Commission as a whole, because it's their document. They have to approve with council for their review and hopefully endorsement. as well as Westcog for their review.
Why would we have Westcog involved in that?
Because the state tells us we have to.
Okay, good enough.
And because this plan may have some regional implications. And that's the purpose. That's why the state wants us to share it with the region. To first of all, to ensure that the plan is consistent with the regional plan, which my staff will be doing our own internal review to make sure we're not conflicting it in any way. And to afford the region an opportunity to weigh in on some things that they're trying to achieve region-wide that we could potentially support within the plan. And the state tells us we need to do that. Now, here's the caveat. Unless there's something that conflicts with the regional plan, we are not obliged to make amendments, even if Westcog asks for something to be included, changed, omitted. Unless it's conflicting with the regional plan, we have discretion in what comments we receive and how we make those changes. To a certain extent, the same holds true with council. Council is really advisory in this. Ideally, council agrees with everything or maybe provides us some input and we respond to that accordingly. But council's role in this is really advisory too. And it's ultimately the commission that can decide how to respond to comments received from both Westcog and council. And this body as well, this committee, it will be advising the commission ultimately in it choosing to adopt the plan. So we're all in this together. So that happens in September. That affords us a month to make any changes in response to council, Westcog, or as directed by the commission itself. October, we file the plan for public review, which needs to happen at least 35 days in advance of a public hearing. That means it gets filed in the city clerk's office, it gets put online, and the public has one last chance to weigh in. And depending on what we hear from the public, we could choose to make some revisions. If substantial revisions are required because the public is outraged over a certain approach we take, and we decide that the best way to respond is to move in another direction, and that requires a substantial reworking of any part of the plan, we do that work, we refile it, and we go back into the 35-day waiting period, which means it pushes out the public hearing a little bit. Most of the time, I can tell you that if we make any changes in that coming out of that public review process, they're very often, sometimes very minor. And what Planning Commission can do at public hearing is to adopt the plan with those revisions pending. The plan is adopted. We make the final adjustments, revisions to the plan. That is the adopted plan, and that's what gets filed with the state. So we have a game plan that gets this plan approved by the end of this year, in advance of the old plan expiring.
Francisco,
Yes.
I like that we have 3 whacks at the review draft section of implementation plan in May, June, and July. And then we roll into the August where we do the submitting. I'm a little nervous about September, and I'm just wondering if we should put in a provisional date for a second meeting. We're going to be getting back the feedback from the commissions. And at that point, we need to file a plan for public review. And just listening to what I heard tonight, there's a couple of people, including myself, that have some issues that may bubble up in that September meeting. So if we could have a provisional second meeting in September, hopefully we wouldn't have to use it, but we've got one scheduled so that we can take that feedback from the commission and wrestle with that in one meeting. And if we need a little more time, we'll have it in September so that we can then file for the October plan for public review. I think May, June, and July are fine. August is okay. I don't believe anybody here will be running for office in November. I think we're all local folks here, not state folks who will be running. And I don't think anybody wants to have a couple of meetings in June, July, or August. But I think September, if we need one, it might not be the worst idea to at least have a slot for one if we need it. That's my opinion, but I would be more comfortable if we had that blocked out, just in case.
I think Paul's idea is pretty good.
Yeah, okay.
We can
Thank
kick
you.
that around to the next meeting.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got it right here. Sharon's got it loud and clear. So, yeah. Okay. All right, and then looking at the big picture, we've since updated this project schedule given where we're at in the process. And yeah, here we are. This is how it lays out. And it's good to have all that existing conditions work behind us and be well into the public engagement. We have some really exciting work in front of us. This part of the process is where a lot of the hard work is, but it's really exciting to see all the work start to come together. So I really look forward to working with you over the next several months.
Thank you, Francisco. That was great. And I didn't mean to rush anybody before, but I really wanted to get to the themes and start to take a look at them. So we will get you a PDF of this presentation. We'll get you the matrix with the themes and all the bullets, and then just email me back any comments. Maybe we do it in like an Excel sheet or something. People can just add things to it. I don't know. You'll figure that out, Francisco. Whatever's easiest. However you want to get it back to me, that's fine. Send me an email, and then we shall meet in March.
Our next meeting is March 15th at 4 o'clock.
March 15th, 4 o'clock.
Good.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate
thank you.
everyone's time. And with that, it's 6:07. Take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Paul, seconded by
Vinny.
Second.
Bob.
Vinny. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion